Let me start by introducing myself. My name is Michael Ovadia. I work with the Archain Cooperative in the United States. And my work there is really focused on culture, people, and the business strategy to make the organization, the cooperative, more effective, a better functioning organism, so to speak. But in my prior life, I did a PhD at Stanford University in California, and my doctoral work was on humanizing markets. So I looked at essentially the psychology of exchange in peer-to-peer systems and peer-to-peer networks, and what enables and fosters a greater sense of community, trust, and belonging, and what undermines that. And as my research unfolded more and more, I found there was a lot of implications on money, how we think about money, and how we think about currency. So my conversation today, or my presentation today, will focus on what we know about money, what I found around the psychology of money, and then some initial thoughts on cryptocurrency. But my hope is really to get in dialogue with the people in this room around cryptocurrency, since it's a new territory. So the question is, when you look at this bill, what does it mean to you? Or perhaps this means less to some people in this room than this bill. Maybe this is what helped form some of our initial thoughts back when it was worth something. In my mind, this is, as an American, this was my early image of money. And money is a funny thing. In some sense, it's really neutral. And in some sense, it gets embodied or imbued with infinite forms and sources of meaning. So this is Benjamin Franklin. He's one of our great presidents. If you look at the US dollar, it's where we deify and remember many of our great presidents and great leaders throughout time. And as a child, I remember some of the most painful conversations, in my household at least, were about money, about making more money, about how money is spent. And money is associated with many emotions, stories, and beliefs in my mind. And yet, as a PhD, I also turn to this quote by George Simmel, who actually was a professor here in Berlin and in Germany, which suggests that money is actually incredibly useful. And in fact, that's the assumption, neutral, useful and neutral. And in fact, that's the assumption made by economists, right? Money, with all its colorlessness and indifference, becomes a common denominator of all values. Irreparably, it hollows out the core of things, their individuality, their specific value, and their incomparability. All things float with equal specific gravity in the constantly moving stream of money. All things lie on the same level and differ from one another only in the size of the area that they cover. So money is, and has been, or so we think, a common denominator, the thing that everything can be boiled down to, the thing that exchange itself and human relationships themselves can get distilled into, at least in Simmel's view. And yet, if you take a religious stance, in the New Testament, we talk about money being the root of all evil. The idea that to become a brahmacharya, or a Buddhist monk, you have to give up all of your money. And in fact, you have to beg for food every day. And so there's something also distasteful at the same time in our society that suggests maybe money is not as neutral as we think it is. Right? And of course, the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was not just about the distribution of money and wealth, but also what that money and the systems of money and power around it came to symbolize. But here we are today. Why am I talking about money? This is a crypto conference. We're about a revolution. We're about changing and transforming the world. We have visions of solving our social problems, right? Of decentralization, of creating something different and tangible and unlike what we've seen before. Occupy Wall Street, that's a thing of the past. Well, except this is also the crypto revolution, right? And so many of the images and the icons that we have of this new narrative around crypto and cryptocurrency are born of and tied back to our current notions of money, of the dollar, of the yen, of whatever your archetype of money is that you grew up with, right? And we stare and look at charts, and we worry about how much is the price of Bitcoin relative to the US dollar, or Ethereum relative to the US dollar. What are our current trading strategies, right? We have huge banking institutions on Wall Street who are now starting to speculate in cryptocurrencies. And so, crypto revolution? Well, let's see. It's possible, but what I'm observing as a sociologist and a social scientist is that the crypto revolution is replicating the same patterns that we've had around money and exchange in Western society that we're actually rebelling against. And so I think it's actually useful to take a step back and talk about the unpacking of what money is today, what we know about money, and then I'd love to return to how crypto is different or not so different, but also how it could be different, or in what special cases could we actually create systems of exchange using cryptocurrency that activate a different psychology than we've known get activated through fiat and traditional money systems. So I'm going to, for the purpose of this presentation, break down the construct of money into two pieces. One is like systems of exchange. So when we think about currency, and currency could be physical assets. There's also social currency. There's lots of types of currency, but money's about exchange. So there's systems of exchange, and there's the psychology of money. So let's start talking about systems of exchange and different systems of exchange out there, and as a framework or as a benchmark for this conversation. So, do you need any help? Different from most marketplaces, but this is a system of exchange found at Burning Man. And I know there's a parallel conversation being discussed right now at Archon around Archain and Burning Man. But Burning Man is the emblematic gift economy, right? And Burning Man is devoted to acts of gift giving. The value of a gift is unconditional. Gifting does not contemplate a return or exchange for something of equal value. So I am an 8-time burner. This was me at Burning Man last year, and was sad to miss it this year because I was trying to help support this movement and Archain moving forward. But Burning Man, just to clarify, is not a bartering system. It's not me exchanging an ice pop for you fixing my tire. Burning Man is a system for exchange that in the default world we use money for, but here in Burning Man, gift giving happens. And Burning Man is critically a social experiment that's absent from money in its social system and structure, and as a result is also lacks the psychological impact that money has on human behavior. I'm going to talk more about the psychological aspect of money in a more concrete way in a minute, but just to give you a sense for what it feels like at Burning Man when money is not part of the system. I remember several years ago, before I actually had done this sort of research, I helped someone set up their tent, and they were alone, and gave them some supplies of ours, and just their first time burner, I helped them do what they needed to do. And they were super grateful, which was wonderful. And we hugged. And then he reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out a $20 bill. And it triggered a whole bunch of stuff for me, psychologically. One is, he's violating a social norm of this exchange system and what we've created. But second of all, as I looked at that $20 bill, I felt myself slowly slipping out of Burning Man, slowly slipping out of the frame of mind that I had been put into, that I'd worked so hard over several days to create for myself, and the quote-unquote magic, which we can concretize and more, but that magic was disappearing. In a sense, my psychological schema, my mental model, was shifting from one that was more communal and gift-based back into transactional frame that we use in most of society. So let's make this a little more concrete in terms of the structure. What happened at Burning Man was something that's called indirect exchange or generalized exchange, where I help that person fix his bike, right? And that person and I don't take that person's $20 bill, and that person may go ahead and cook breakfast for another person. And that person receives that person's breakfast, may give another person a great compliment and a hug, or whatever the items of exchange might be. And you create this system where everyone is gifting to everyone else without the expectation of anything in return. Let's contrast that to a direct exchange, where I might walk to a store in the default world, might say, here's my bike, can you fix it? Give them $20, and they give me a repair in exchange. Or I walk into Walmart, and I buy a new bike for $100, and so on and so forth. So there are different ways. So these are fundamentally different ways exchange happens structurally. And what I'm arguing is, and the research suggests, is psychologically, they're somewhat incompatible. Or when I start using the logic on bringing direct exchange money into a gift economy, it starts to undermine the gift economy itself. And this is where I want to get into that psychological piece, the psychological frame of exchange. So a frame of exchange is social construction and interpretation of information presented by an organization, including its language, symbols, signs, and design elements. It's what I talked about earlier, everything the dollar bill or euro or Deutschmark represents. And there's a spectrum of a frame of mind that's more communal or community-oriented, and one that's more economic or market-driven. So this goes back to where I started. That even though we have a rhetoric, perhaps, in the blockchain movement of we want to build community and create social infrastructure and create cohesion, we're still using a logic, activating psychological frames that are more transactional in nature. So let's use a case study or two of why that's complicated and messy. Starting with the extreme case of gift economies. So who's familiar with couch surfing in this room? Most people, not everyone though. So couch surfing is a really simple model that started, I want to say like 15, 20 years ago, where I stay on someone's sofa like this. It's an online community or platform. There's some very basic verification. And there's a process by which I'll stay on someone's sofa for free, and there's nothing exchanged except that experience. And then I may return to San Francisco, and someone from Milan may fly and stay on my sofa for free. And then that person returns to Milan, and someone from Barcelona may stay on his sofa for free, and so on and so forth. So it's a gift economy. It's a generalized exchange system, just like we talked about earlier. Worked really well for a while. And one interesting thing people don't know a lot about with couch surfing is it began actually by engaging the Burning Man community. So they found a subset of people who are familiar with the social norms of gift giving with which to launch. But then things started to change. Then couch surfing became a for-profit organization and started talking about profitability. Structurally, nothing changed, but suddenly what the organization represented signaled something different, and there was a huge uproar. Suddenly, Airbnb launches. How does that affect couch surfing? Well, suddenly, Airbnb takes the idea of a spare room or spare sofa and puts money on it and say you should be able to sell it and commoditize it and wrap it up in a package. Suddenly, that shifts what a spare room looks like on couch surfing. And also, people who are less in it for the mission or purpose join because they just want a free bed. They're like, wow, why would I pay for an Airbnb when I can get a free couch surfing opportunity? So what happened is couch surfing became more transactional over time. And suddenly you start to see odd behaviors where things like sex, for example, gets transacted more and more in couch surfing. And so I have colleagues who've done similar research on this. And there's other work. This is a potlatch gifting ceremony among Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest. And there's work done by Mauss, a French sociologist, looking at gift giving, which looks really generous, but actually in a lot of these native tribes became a show of status. So there was a lot of pressure to have the biggest gifts to show you're the most powerful chief, and you had the most prosperous tribe, and if someone couldn't give as big a gift as the other tribe, they were shamed and had to go to war. So again, it goes back to these systems of exchange that I talked about. I'm oversimplifying by direct exchange and indirect, but those are the fundamental ones for this presentation, are only part of the equation. There's also the framing, which is embedded in the idea of money. So I'm arguing is the idea of money itself and how we talk about and think about it has meaning in a life of its own. So how do we understand the psychology of money and what it means and how it impacts how we behave with other people. Psychologists do something called priming. So priming is the activation of like a subconscious construct. I'm not just going to read you this definition. Priming is an implicit memory effect in which exposure to a stimulus influences the response to another stimulus. So for example, my emotional state might change if you show me the color red versus the color, a pale yellow versus the color black. And then if you ask me to make a decision afterwards, I might make a slightly different decision because you just showed me a certain color. It's a well-established psychological effect. Marketers use it all the time. It's why cereal boxes have different colors for kids and adults and all of that. And it's much more than just color. So in these priming studies, you walk into a lab room and you see and then there's a piece of art on the wall. And one piece of art is just a picture of bills and currency. Another is a picture of neutral flowers. When people walk out of the room, it's highly unlikely they even remember the art on the room, and they certainly cannot say what the study was about. It's a subconscious effect, just like I may not remember the room was pale yellow or red. As these studies got more sophisticated, they found that they can just, even on a computer screen, if you're taking a survey, flash for a fraction of a second images like this, and it'll have the same effect. So it really is subconscious. So why does this matter? Because studies priming money, this simple image elicits really different behaviors from different people. So money brings about a self-sufficient orientation where people prefer to be free of dependency and free of dependence. So I'm less likely to ask for help if I've seen a picture of money. I'm less likely to want to go on vacation with another person. In the case of this study, when people are primed with the image of money, and you ask them if they want help on a difficult task or an unsolvable task, they take longer and longer on average or never ask for help. So it creates this egocentrism. Let's move on to another study. So another interesting effect is the idea of money brings about, if you look at on the chart on the left, even physical distance. So if I'm actually walking into a room, but I've had the idea of money activated on a screensaver, so there's a bunch of fish versus dollar bills flying around, I'm less likely to sit in a chair sitting next to another person. So even perceptions of physical distance are affected. And similarly, I'm less likely to choose to work with another person on an upcoming task if I've been exposed to the idea of money or money screensaver. So again, it depends what you're looking for. And there other studies have shown that when the idea of money is activated, people are more likely to engage in unscrupulous activity because they associate with, or the theory is they associate with slimy business people. So morality, in a sense, comes into more question. So that's just a preview of what happened in the lab studies. And I bring this up only because I think this is important to talk about because there's so much rhetoric within the broader blockchain and crypto community about being part of something different, creating a world of greater social solidarity, cohesion, trust. And this is the backdrop, the psychological backdrop that anything that currency, fiat is working with, and that this movement is implicitly associated with, unless we differentiate. So now I'm going to transition to my own doctoral work. So my research was my dissertation was called Humanizing Markets, and I studied a startup called Yurtle. It's a site for exchanging used goods. So you could think of it as an alternative to bartering or selling. It looks a lot and feels a lot like eBay, as I'll show you in a second. And it originally started with its own virtual currency unrelated to the dollar that could be used internally. And then they eventually shifted to a more dollar-centered system, and I'll show you the results that came about by doing so. So again, it's a market resembling eBay with an alt currency, and in fact, the intention was to switch over to Bitcoin or Ethereum when they became more mature. And so you could see there's credits that they use internally. Otherwise, very similar to eBay, but it's internal credits that you can use to swap goods But the other element that I want to emphasize is a strong aspiration to build community. And they saw themselves as part of the sharing economy. They're a benefit corporation. And they talked a lot around sharing and community. So the benefits of sharing certainly include finding enhanced productivity from idle assets, yet even greater benefits coming from engaging people in pro-social activities. That's a movement I signed up for. And they create a number of structures I'm happy to talk about during the Q&A that support this notion of community and imbue the system with a feeling of humanity, humanness, community, and relationships, and enable people to foster relationships even in the process of exchanging used goods to get stuff they want. So here's just to give you a sense of the transition of users as they got more involved in the platform. Because again, people came in with a mindset similar to eBay. So you talk to a new user and a common quote might be, I always like getting and browsing for stuff. So when I saw an ad on Facebook with the word free in it, I grabbed it. In fact, they recruited most of their users through Facebook ads that more or less said, come get free stuff from us. But then when you talk to people who've been on the platform for a while, the tenor is quite different. I was never looking to get involved in something like this. I'm a successful guy, a VP at a major bank. One day I randomly found the app. I did a few transactions, then realized these are real people who were thanking me for stuff and being appreciative, and things became self-reinforcing. It was like I worked my way up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and now I think I'm part of a bigger society. Yurtles changed me. And just to give you more evidence that the way they thought about the currency is quite different. If I post something on eBay, I know the actual dollar value of it in cash. On Yurtle, I'm sacrificing those dollars for points. Even though I get points, I think of it as getting something for free. If I give it to Yurtle, I could help someone out. It's more of a giving, caring kind of thing. eBay is more of a transaction. Again, even though they're selling things for credits, people talk about it differently. I really don't see the site as having monetary value. It's trading. I value things differently from money. It's more of a gut feel. And the whole process feels much more human. When I have a voice recorder up for auction, a woman contacted me prior saying that she hoped to win it. She told me that it was for a friend who was bedridden looking to tell his life story at 75. At that point, I picked her as the winner, so he ended the auction early, even though he could have gotten more money probably by keeping it in the auction. And I responded by saying, your story really touched me. After receiving the recorder, she sent a thank you note to me saying, I want to let you know that there are 3 people who will use this for autobiographic purposes, which got me really choked up. I was a bit heartfelt. I don't care about the credits. It's a nice little bonus that comes with it. If I knew all my things had a backstory like that, it would be much more rewarding. So again, the dynamic where you start to see thanking of people, telling of stories, talking about the impact that item had on them, not typical for a transactional exchange. And at some point, we talked about this direct exchange, I give you something, you give me something in return, and gift giving like Burning Man being fundamentally different paradigms. But what I observed in the Yurtle community is as people became more engaged, with a little bit of prodding by the founders and norm setting, they started to re-perceive things as gifting, and they actually then started to giftify things they were getting paid for and credits for, right? So a number of people had quotes like this. You're sending a package of, call it like a water bottle or a used water bottle or a used pair of jeans, whatever it may be in your package that you ship off to someone. But suddenly, I put stickers all over the boxes that I send. Each active user figured out their own trademark things to do to distinguish their packages, such as stickers on boxes or including a little card, especially including special gifts or notices for other users that I know I had exchanged with before. So you're creating this multi-tier system where, yes, I'm getting credits and giving something away, but I'm also imbuing it with gift-like qualities. I'm gift wrapping the item. I'm adding bonus items. Your dynamics where people wouldn't have enough credits and someone else would offer to pay for them. So you're seeing gift giving start to take over a more direct exchange or transactional market structure system. And I argue, and I'll show you the evidence for this in a minute, that a lot of that has to do with the framing and the rhetoric of the currency and the fact that it couldn't be seen or perceived or translated into fiat. It was its own alt currency. So in the middle of this study, I had something bizarre happen, and the way startups work, the founders got together and said, we think it's important that people be able to see and understand this currency and value items on it more easily, so we're going to make our currency look and feel more like the dollar. You still can't take it out of our system. We still want community, right? One, we still want community. And structurally, we still want to keep this as an internal currency. You can't convert it to dollars easily. But this message shows up on my phone one day. 1 credit's now equal to 10 cents. You start seeing this image of dollars imbued in their currency. And they also recalibrated the pricing. So instead of this water bottle being 260 credits, it might be 15 Ural dollars. And in fact, even though almost no one did this, I could even use cash dollars to buy Ural dollars. Again, due to inflation, that never happened for a number of reasons. But psychologically, I know there's now a link. And I start to think about Ural dollars in terms of regular dollars. So structurally, nothing changed except the association between the Ural credits, or the Ural dollar now, and fiat, and that link being made. Community, all these other messaging stayed the same. So what started to happen? Significant decline, lots of little stars of significance, right? Around perceptions of, is Ural community? Is Ural warm? Is Ural cooperative? Is Ural generous? So as we think about trying to build and sustain community, these perceptions matter in terms of how I treat and interact with other people and are consistent with my qualitative data. So my survey data for the same users before and after the exchange had their perception of Ural changed before and after the switch to the dollar. Survey of the same users, asking about trust. Most people in Ural can be trusted, significant decline. People follow through on their commitments, which is an important measure of trust, or the primary measure of trust in this community, significant decline. Yet, if you ask them about the last person with whom they exchanged, was that person trustworthy? Did they basically follow through on their commitment and send you, your pants as promised, not broken or stained? And they say yes. So this is important because at least in that immediate period in the 2-month window between measurement A and measurement B of the community, it's not like people were necessarily suddenly really untrustworthy. But people were perceiving people around them as less trustworthy. I'm arguing because the psychological signals that were being sent around currency. And then, do you identify with the platform? Again, to have a community, to have people who work together to solve common problems, a big sociological measure is identification with that community. I feel connected to other users, significantly lower. I feel belonging with Ural, significantly lower. Being part of Ural is an important reflection of who I am, significantly lower. And then back to the gift-giving piece I mentioned earlier, the sense that this community is moving towards giftifying the transaction. And starting, again, an indicator that this is a community or a tribe and not some economic transaction on Wall Street. I feel motivated to give to Ural without expecting anything in return, significant decline. And did I thank the last person from whom I won an item, significant decline. So these are people who are socialized into thanking. Again, it's totally unnecessary. You paid for it in credits. At least they may not see it as paying, but that's what happened. But they are less likely to thank someone because the psychological context of the currency and the priming has changed. And just to say that what I was later able to show with my research is that this shift from a credit-based system to a dollar-based system or dollar-based signal resulted in decline in engagement, so people are less engaged in the platform, which makes sense. I found that community and being part of the community was a reason for engaging, and that decline in engagement could be explained by the decline in solidarity and identification with the platform. So I'll just say is this actually matters if you want people to engage and use the platform in some way. Let's see. Here we go. So this is just kind of a 2x2 to summarize what I found with the Ural situation and the conceptual framework I set up. So I talked about 2 structures of exchange, direct exchange and indirect exchange or gifting. And then I talked about this frame of exchange being more transactional, like an eBay, or more communal, like at least if Couchsurfing or other gifting sites need to be. So part of Ural's success was it was a direct exchange structure, because these general gift-giving exchanges are really hard to sustain. But it created this frame and psychology around it, a big part of which being included in their currency, which felt more communal. And so you could almost think about an animation where Yordle over time, especially, or as users became part of Yordle over time, felt more and more like a gifting system and starts to blur that line in the middle. And when the advent of the dollar came, the Yordle dollar came, even though the structure didn't change, you saw less gifting, so it moved back towards direct, and moved back up towards transactional. Let's see. Oh, here we go, the animation does that. So, what's a big finding from this? I think it's really important particularly in the crypto space and this exchange space, we have cryptocurrencies, we have things that are used, in lieu of fiat. We also have blockchain, but we also have tokens that are exchanged on the blockchain, and we have many systems going on. Just to be clear on what we're talking about, and there's currency, there's money, which is fiat. There's a relationship or a lack of relationship between the currency we're looking at and money, and then there's marketplaces, and there's exchanges happening in those markets. And what I really found, and this builds on others' research, is that currency is not the same thing as money. And money is not the same thing as markets. But when we create a link between our currency and money in people's minds, we expect those markets and behavior in those markets not to be too different from how they would be with money or fiat in them. Where do we go from here? I want to just infuse this conversation now with just this idea that multiple currencies can exist at once in one society or one civilization, and that's not a new idea. There's a scholar at Princeton named Zelizer who's done work on money's social meaning and this idea of social money. So it's really this idea that money and currency has social meaning imbued in it. So it's really different from the similar quote earlier. And it's not neutral. But if you take an anthropological view, you can see that different cultures and different societies throughout time, even in America, even in the West, have had different types of monies for different purposes, right? And so, seashells are a form of money, but you might have seashells and precious stones and gold, and they might have different uses. Societies have had different types of money. For example, in the US, we've had money only women could use in the 1800s that had its own certain purposes, can only be used in certain situations. You have tribal societies that have certain types of currency or money that exist only for death, only for birth, only for certain types of rituals. And so, anthropologically, we know that human societies and cultures can exist, and human systems of exchange can exist, where different types of money can have different meaning and social purposes. And those social systems can actually get reinforced, actually, in some way by these multiple currencies doing different things. Yeah, I'll stop there. I'm happy to talk more about that during the Q&A. And that's different from the alternative currency movements we've had in the US. And so I just encourage, and other parts of the world, so I would just encourage people to also think about and learn from the fact that we've had alt currencies emerge among communities. But they've, again, replicated, in my view, a lot of the logic and thinking of traditional fiat currency and just said, well, we can only use it in this bounded space, and then wonder why they haven't happened. And, academic research has shown that very few of these have succeeded, and they tend to be from people who in communities that are more transient, where there is less solidarity and there's less social bonds bringing people together in any way. So I think there's things to learn from these in the sense that you can't just take fiat, give it a new name, say we can only use it in this boundary, and have it work. So what does this all say with regard to cryptocurrency? Well, as I've been suggesting this whole presentation, the way that current crypto market structures and framing are set up really seems to replicate fiat psychology. And the easier it is to convert to dollars or euros, whatever it may be, and the more that's emphasized, the more it will be treated as fiat. And it doesn't mean it's not a more practical, better, useful fiat, and that's fine. But let's just call it money and not claim that those types of currencies are going to necessarily evoke a different way of interacting between human beings. Okay. Framing matters. And framing cryptocurrencies in a way that's differentiated is what could enable this to become a movement. And so how we frame and talk about our currencies allows us to actually attracts different type of people, primes different mindsets psychologically, and encourages different behavior. But what we just want to say is that we need to be credible. So we can't just say or claim that, set up a system that looks and feels like one that's around self-interested market transactions and say it's going to do all this social good and say it's really about solving this problem and bringing solidarity, whatever it may be. You don't want to, people are really good at picking up on hypocrisy. There's an opportunity to create truly social special currencies and have those live on a platform perhaps in parallel, like I was talking about. And maybe this is happening already, but I'd be really curious to see if you have a larger platform, how multiple currencies that have different types of meaning or purposes could exist there. So for example, how might social currency or social capital be capitalized? How might signals, even like in Facebook, like likes, which they had at Yordle as well, like liking items is a form of social currency, right? Commenting is a form of social currency. And that's discrete and separated from any sort of market exchange. Facebook Markets is new and a completely different beast. So those are currencies, right? And what more could we do around currencies to capture those sentiments, those emotions, capture gifting, capture thanking, capture those sort of behaviors is a real possibility in the crypto space. And finally, if cryptocurrencies are converted to US dollars, that doesn't mean essentially that the platform, if there's a fundamental blockchain platform where there's a currency that runs through it, and that's convertible to US dollars, you could have technologies built on top of that that still have different currencies that have more social meaning or purpose. Right? And so there's ways these can not only exist in one platform, but be multi-layered. And so as we get to our chain, I just think there's an interesting opportunity to think about how we engage our community. And so we have Discord, and we have people who are actively engaged and involved in different ways, and who are giving a lot of themselves. And I think it'd be interesting as an experiment to think about what currencies are already being exchanged between people that are going unnamed. And if we try it as an experiment, naming those currencies or making them exchangeable, what might that look like? What social meaning could we imbue there? How can we start to take our values and our mission and our higher purpose, which as far as I can tell are really authentic intentions, and start to codify them into some form of currency that people can start exchanging amongst themselves? What if we ask the community how they might do that? What might that look like? Just as a provocation. So at this point, I'd love to just engage in a conversation. I'm curious what you all take away from the research on the psychology of money and currency. I'll also say I tried to find research on the psychology of cryptocurrency and all that, and there's nothing there yet. There's very little on alt currencies. So if any of you are thinking about getting PhDs or doing research, that would be great. But I'm curious what you think what I said really does translate, and where might I be wrong, How might we design cryptocurrencies to be something different, to foster the social connection and social cohesion in the cases where that is a goal? And what could our chain do to be part of that happening? What experiments could we start running or tinkering with to actualize our greater social vision through exchange? Microphones are here.
Thank you very much, Michael. A lot of the points you brought up are things I've been thinking about for a long time, especially in psychology when you turn some sort of interaction into something transactional, that the whole humanness of it tends to degrade quite quickly. Mm-hmm. And then in cryptocurrency, I often see the psychology of I just want to get rich because I saw other people get rich and now I'm going to get it in some other type of money, right?
Yeah.
But there are other properties that I think are interesting to think about. So you have exchange, but also that's similar to something like unit of account, right? Like something that you can, well, what is it that you're accounting for, right? It doesn't have to be tokens in which you can exchange for. It can be, like you were saying, those likes and some of those other things. But my real question here is when you're talking about the humanness of these transactions and how put it in a particular way or frame tends to make them more human than less human. Have you seen any best practices or things that you can sort of draw around these sort of units or accounts or things that can make them as human as possible while still getting some sort of useful work done?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Let me start by responding to what you said around the get-rich-quick mentality. If you can get rich quick, you will attract people who want to get rich quick, and they will behave in ways to make sure they do get rich quick, and that might have implications for the long-term viability and incentives that creates for building something long-term. We have a market. We're in a bear market now, so that is also attracting perhaps a different and detracting a different pool of people than we had before. But I also think there's going to be multiple cryptocurrencies and multiple systems and perhaps subsystems. And so I think it's about defining the right systems where you can have these sort of more meaningful humanized exchanges happen. And to your question about best practices, this is a conceptual model I'm not going to fully get into in the case of Yurtle, but there's a lot of ways a communal frame of exchange can be activated. One is a culture of real people. So there are a lot of subtle ways that Yurtle made it feel like you're dealing with human beings, right? Whether it be a profile and a profile picture, a bit of the person's story. I actually think Airbnb even does this better, right? You're not staying, you're a guest. Like, where does the word guest come from? It's like, in India, guest is God. In the Bible, guests are always welcome in the home, right? And you're a host. That's priming a way to behave or act. When I look at your profile, I see you as a human. I can see bits of your story. I see bits of your relationship, right? The whole money thing, so Airbnb's created algorithms where even the cost and the money is automatically calculated for the host. They can override that, right? But that kind of can fade in the background. And then it's just about, is this the right house? Is it the right place from the host perspective? And there's also stories that they tell the host of here's what a great host looks like. And it's not about optimizing the price on your website. It's about picking someone up at the airport. It's about making the bed. It's about finishing touches on the breakfast you surprise the person with. And as a former Airbnb host, I did things like that. From the guest perspective, you pay, you see the money, you agree to the money, and then it's gone. There's no more bills or dollars or things to sign. In the case of, I think Uber is not the best example of creating a humanized experience. But I'm not seeing a taxi meter flip in front of me, right? So you're basically taking money and the primary money and the ideas about money out of the conversation. As you're minimizing that as much as possible, and you're elevating the human as much as possible. In the case of Yurtle, they also had no rating system, and that's important in two ways. One is you're not turning a person into a number or a score. And actually they found with couch surfing that when they started adding more ratings and reviews and giving those numbers, the quality of friendships declined. So we went from being best friends to acquaintances on the scale as they started having more ratings and more information. So there's critically there's an element of you're not turning the person into a number, and there's a way of where risk actually makes you more likely to bond or cohere. So if I know that this person, I mean, we'll take eBay or Airbnb as an example, has a score of like 4.9 out of 5 and there's 722 reviews, it's a risk calculation. If I see a human being's face and eyes in their home and I have to say, I'm taking a leap of faith to trust you, then suddenly when I have a positive experience, which may be less likely depending on how trustworthy the community is and all that, if I have a positive experience and I know they're not trying to optimize for some review or some score, that has me view that experience in a less transactional way and realize this is a community. And that's what you start to realize with the Yurtle, like, wow, this person sent me what they promised with some little note, and they had no incentive to, or you can argue, they have soft incentives, but it signals something different. And the currency is part of it. The currency is actually really part of signaling a mindset of cooperation versus competition. Money signals competition, self-interest, and currency and the neutrality takes that competitive, self-interested signal out and allows these other signals to play up. So what I'll say is that I don't have examples. Well, actually, I may have an example in this space. I don't know if these are my backup slides. I'm not sure I don't know how it's going to play out, but I actually, I've got to know some of the New Mondo folks who have a new coin that they're going to use within their exchange system. And the way they talk about and frame, it's like a community of like kind of eco-villages and eco-resorts and around the world, and you can only use in their internal community. And they use language like, gifting, I believe, in here somewhere. New coin will credit holders on platform with platform credit, a form of gift from new coin transactions. Listen, they're getting paid. They're you know what I mean? But I think it'll be interesting to see for this and other cases that are really just talking about cryptocurrencies and rather than blockchain technologies, how that plays out and what they learn. Because there's a bit of efforts to frame things, and it feels more authentic because it's already sort of communities that attract like-minded people. I hope that was helpful. Other questions, comments, ideas?
It seems like a lot of these ecosystems, closed ecosystems, so for example, Burning Man, they externalize the monetary exchanges. So I've been twice, and I'm not a veteran going, so that also changes maybe the social relationship, but you waste a lot of money, I feel like. You spend a lot of money because you can't buy anything there, and you end up throwing everything away, so it gets externalized outside of Burning Man, but there's still that cost. So in some ways, my experience with that was there's actually a really good reason for having money as an efficient allocator of resources. Instead of us overbuying and being very consumerist, to be not consumerist within Burning Man, then we externalize all of that into the real world or the default world. So to me, I'm a little bit skeptical of when we talk about these little ecosystems because they're little ecosystems within themselves that depend on a transactional world in which they operate, and they, in fact, externalize those transactional aspects.
I think that's a great critique, and it depends what you're optimizing for. If you're optimizing for eco-efficiency or even maximum allocation, use of resources, environmentally and cost-wise, Burning Man is expensive, and especially if you I camp kind of at a bare minimum, bare bones sort of way, and it's still not cheap, and you go up and up and up, and it gets more and more expensive. It depends what you're optimizing for, though. What Burning Man's trying to create, and if we want to get into Burning Man, I can talk about more reasons as to why that's been eroded over time, with turnkey camps and other social status signals and all that. But what it's trying to create is an experience that's money-free. But of course, our society functions with money, and we use that money to prepare and enable ourselves to have that intensive social experience, right? Even in Yurtle, people paid money for those goods that they're giving away, or even if they handmade them, or they were gifted to them, money was involved. Money flows through. I mean, this is where Simmel's quote has some truth. Money does flow like a river through everything, you know? For me to get here, my parents put a lot of money into me, feeding me, clothing me, sending me to school, etc. But if we're trying to create this social container of gifting, and there's a number of reasons. There's work on like hive theory, why like rituals like Burning Man or traditional science, you have other rituals like that, or pilgrimages or gift-giving rites, are part of building something else. It's building like that social fabric, that web of trust, that belief in humanity is what came to me after my first year at the Burn. And the sense that people will step up and give in ways that they just don't in the rest of the world. And so, yes, money is involved in the exchange. Money is involved in the lead up, but because it's absent and you have this norm of gifting, because inevitably things happen, things break, you forget something, whatever it may be, that's kind of that norm of gifting to meet our needs or just delight us and surprise us with a watermelon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon in the hot sun. Those are the things that that kind of emotional social reward and make us want to give back without expecting anything in return. So there are different measures. Curious what your reaction to that is.
How do you scale? Because that's always the problem. So in the context of, say, complementary or local currencies, so it's kind of a similar idea that we facilitate trade and have trade dollars stay in the community, but they have difficulties in scaling. And it's also, if we're talking about specifically in the context of communities like Burning Man, I mean, that scale problem is always an issue, and it's only because we can afford to give in this context that context works. But then, right, it doesn't necessarily translate or scale well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you can look at online. First of all, there's kind of like the ideal, like I can see these people, connect with these people, relate to. We're talking about activating a tribal mindset or like a communal sharing mindset in the work of Alan Fisk. Like this idea where community, tribe, family, that part of our mind is activated. And so we're working together to make it through Burning Man, to make sure we have great experiences or address climate change impacts, whatever it may be. That's a part of the mind we want to be able to activate or tap into in some situations, not all situations. It's harder when you don't have a group in person. But there are ways of signaling or feeling that are available through virtual communities. And so the things that I talked about, that I measured, were trust. Do I trust these people around me? In the sense, do I feel safe with them? Do I feel their intents are aligned with my intents? Social solidarity is is there a perception of a community? Do I see or feel a community? I'm part of a tribe. And then critically is identification. Do I identify with this community? And so you start seeing online communities. You see it in torrent sites. You see it in things like Reddit. You see it. I saw it in Yurtle. Is that people through these virtual communities start exchanging with each other. It may be exchanging knowledge, information, compliments. It may be uploading hacked music that others download, right? Depends what that currency, but they're exchanging things. And through the act of giving and gift giving, trust is built. And by taking in or using or imbibing something from that community. So by taking that free watermelon, right? Or in the case of Yurtle, by receiving that gift that I was gifted, even though I paid for it, and wearing those new pair of jeans or drinking from that water bottle, I'm actually merging my identity in some sense with that community, And so there has to be something exchanged. It has to be utilized or taken in. And that context of trust and generosity has to be set up. And as well as the systems that motivate, there has to be some motivation for good behavior. So yeah, it's great, but I think it's not going to be the same as living as your nuclear family or your extended family or a physical tribe. Your Burning Man camp is different from everyone at Burning Man, right? They're my tribe. But it's good enough, I think, to achieve a lot of the broader social goals and so address some of the broader social problems that I think blockchain is talking about espousing, but it's not necessarily on course to addressing. Other questions, other observations?
Maybe my question will go out of the scope of your presentation. It is for curiosity mostly. We had a discussion recently with one private charity foundation about using cryptocurrency for charity. And the major question from their side was, what can we do with your cryptocurrency? The reason is that they cannot convert those coins into the goods that they could deliver as a charity to poor and so on. So what do you think? Will ever cryptocurrency build the economy side that that more or less everything could be economically purchased within that ecosystem without going to fiat money? So the question for them is actually they don't like even the idea of having extra one more step. That is, convert your cryptocurrency into the fiat money for solving their task of their charity tasks.
Yeah, so I think if you're just using cryptocurrency as a way of, let's say, helping people have access to fiat, then that type of cryptocurrency to me just feels like an extension of fiat, which is fine. I'm not saying like we live in a world without fiat. I'm just saying let's call cryptocurrency a more versatile, useful fiat that may or may not have volatility questions depending on a number of factors, right? So I think in that case, call it, the benefit should be compared to fiat. If you're just saying we want to distribute money to the poor and let them buy or acquire whatever they need in their local currency, then they should be evaluating it in terms of should I go from euros to your cryptocurrency to whatever the local currency is, or should I go directly? I don't see a difference. It might be more useful for those people to use cryptocurrency like fiat in the future, but that's fine. I could think where it might be helpful with charities is if they want it to be used or in a special way. So in charities, they might say, we want this type of currency to be used specifically as a token for education or access to educational tools or materials. And only by being used to access these type of materials can it be utilized. So if they have a mission or a purpose, this is kind of a type of a subcase of special monies, for example. Or if you want to use it as a reward for kids to do well in school. So let's say a kid does I'm brainstorming here. But let's say a kid does really well at school, they get a certain number of these tokens and they can redeem them for these types of things, or maybe it's just recognition from their parents, whatever it may be, and the parents can convert into a number of things. Then it starts to have a special money sort of purpose. And then that's something I think only cryptocurrency is well positioned to do vis-a-vis fiat, where you have another social mission or refinement to what you want the spending to be about.
So I'm faced with this issue. I belong to the digital life community and, of course, our chain. I'm active in guiding the bounty system. And this cultural thing that, seems to be the main thing. And looked into, self-management systems where employees set their own salaries, and there's a cultural shift that you have to take in order to change the perception of money. People in the bounty system paying each other with rocks, may come in because they see this as a way of making money, but the perception that can be created, I hope, in the community is that, this is a way that we give credit to each other for our contribution, and I think that there's got to, there's open circular money, things that people are trying, and I'm all in favor of the gifting idea, and I think that, we can view paying each other as a gifting thing, but it's a shift in complete relearning of what we've been learned in a wage slave economy that we're coming from going into this new community modality.
Yeah, I think you're raising a really important point to the heart of Archain. Let me just say this will be my personal opinion, and there's by no way like Archain's response. It's just my personal thoughts on the bounty system, which you brought up. And also, like, I think it's so cool how rich the Discord community is, how many people are involved, and how many people are giving of themselves and want to be part of this movement and are engaged with GitHub in ways that are uncompensated. And that's not unique to Archain, right? I mean, like, let's take Waze as an app as an example. People are kind of saying, hey, there's a police car here, there's an accident there, and Waze eventually added like social signals to say you're an you're an extra Waze member, super awesome Waze person. But people want to give when they believe there's something to give to, and they get back from the community something of at least emotional reward, or something that reinforces an aspect of the identity they want to reinforce. I'm a good person, I'm a contributor, I'm part of something bigger. But you have to think about the incentives it's setting up and what part of your psyche is activated. And so let's say someone comes into the Archain community and they just want to give, but they see a lot of other people are getting paid to do the same thing, and they're paid in something that at some point, may have a market value. Then that raises questions, kind of like the Airbnb couch surfing dilemma. Well, I was couch surfing for free, and now suddenly, and I was offering myself for free, but suddenly I see my neighbor is giving stuff away on Airbnb, and he's getting $200 a night. So you have to be careful what signals are. You have to be cognizant of what signals are sent.
Yeah, the perception is very bad, and people. There are a group of people central to Archain that feel that everybody should give and not get any credit. That this currency that we made ourselves and we have this huge treasury shouldn't be used to give people credit for their activities. And yet, the level of participation to make Archain a household word around the world, and the amount of effort that we need in building the tools the community needs is not happening. Well, it's happening, but it's happening in a more or less centralized, controlled way. Whereas if we can develop the culture of rewarding each other and guide the system to produce value for Archain, okay, it enables people to sort of like fulfill the desire to engage with the community without sacrificing their livelihood and being able to buy bread if they want. And I think that to a large part, people, a good proportion of people on bounties are not cashing them in. Mm-hmm. This gives them a feeling of ownership in Archain, a feeling of, that they are appreciated. That it's not just somebody saying thank you, but yes. It's something that is more tangible and gives them that belonging and ownership, or it can. It's a different culture.
It can. So I would encourage you guys, first of all, to just look at cases like Linux or Wikipedia, and I'm not the expert on those things, but other distributed open source platforms where people volunteer a lot of time and effort and energy, and they don't get any compensation. So what's the social reward? What's the psychological reward? What do people get from those experiences? And I can hypothesize that, or first of all, I'm happy to connect one-on-one around this afterwards or another time. But I think there's cases we can learn from where people are just giving freely and get reward. Second of all, I think there's nothing wrong in having a system where you have part-time contractors and people are paid for that. But, that's, I guess what I would say is I think the bounty system,
This is a unique, decentralized budgeting and reward system.
Yeah.
There have not been successful such systems in the past.
yes.
And because of the negative perception that we're getting from many people, they're not cooperating or guiding, or they're not engaging with the bounty system. And I think that that's the problem. And I think that we could have a really scalable system. And sure, there are very isolated cases of collaboration at scale.
Yes.
But nobody has cracked the nut on it, okay? And to say, well, we could become a Wikipedia. Well, how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
Okay, and one of the ways we can do that is to utilize the bounty system.
So
okay?
here's my suggestion on the bounty system, and we can sync up afterwards or sometime this week. But my suggestion is I think it's a really interesting case to explore special monies and and other currencies that would signal social status, contribution, and worth, but wouldn't have that association back to the dollar. Because the other thing I worry about was when you have this system where it is convertible back to the dollar is you may have well-intended people like yourself who are opting in, but there also might be people, the subset, they might only be 10%, but some subset of people who are in to exploit the system, and that doesn't create cohesion or solidarity, a sense of oneness, when you can see there's a subgroup that's exploiting and free riding off the system. So I think multiple currencies could actually be an interesting experiment here, and you could see who collects what type of currency.
The avocado trust metric that we're using in the bounty system is proven to be attack resistant. If we get those bad actors in there, they're not going to get the trust rating. They're not going to have control of funds. It's...
So let's sync up offline. Yeah. Let's see, how are we on time? We're done? Okay. Thank you all.